with a lock over there into an artificial creek where the water could be stopped and the moat could be flooded completely with water for 2 years. We did it to protect it. Very popular was hunting in the forest on the one hand, but also boat regattas in the moat, where they organized boat competitions where two competitors competed against each other, go, and something like that. It was great entertainment, and when the water was out, the prince-elector organized hunting events, hunting deers in the moat. That is the entrance tower, huge and high, a demonstration of power, a sign. 170 feet high as well, it might be indestructible. But you can also see the holes in the stones that have been left for the tongues to grab them. Now there are stonemasons working into the tongues to grab the stones to lift them, and the signs on top on the subofficial are the signs of the stonemasons who have been paid per stone and per hour. That were the proof of the words when the stonemasons worked their stones. Above it are the gate giants, symbolizing the loyalty of the nobles towards the prince-elector, and they are ready to protect the rulers for the long-term alliances and their swords. And in between are the lines of they belong to the elite of prince-electors who elected the king in the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. It was valid until Napoleon. 7 elected the king, 3 bishops, and 4 secular prince-electors, and the prince-elector of Palatinus of this area here was the viceroy, replaced the king, and the highest judge, and therefore it's got the globe, the imperial globe, and the sword. The lions are the animals of Palatinus. What is there in between? There's nothing. Started at the beginning of the continuing 13th century, in the 1200s, 800 years ago. In between, there's nothing. Could there be? What has there been in former times? Yeah. Right. A coat of arms of silver, because it was made out of silver, it's not stolen by our lovely neighbors who came here. That has to do with all the damages here in the castle. And so the French came.
Date at the very top underneath the gutter.
Well, the date of that tower is from 1535.
That's 1541. Clear up the very top.
Maybe it has been started 1535 and ended up in 1541. So, wow. 4 more gates. Well, with the portcullis that nobody could get through at that time, who was not invited. Ladies and gentlemen, could you imagine to make all the big destructions here in the castle, to make all the damages? They got a universal key, but it could open almost every door that looked like this. With money you could open almost everything. And the more money, the less money they earned, the better they could be bribed, his soldiers, as you could imagine. And that was the point of insecure as well, that they were very bad paid, and so they took the money from the French and closed their eyes and let them pass through. Well, as you can see, of the big variety of palaces and buildings that remind on great times, well, especially on the 16th century, in the time of the Reformation, and Renaissance style, early in Gothic style, particularly as well in the Rupert Palace here from 1400. Rupert was particularly king of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Fortress towers are outside. Here the palaces, wonderful palaces from the 16th and 17th century. And as well infrastructural buildings for economy, with the castle kitchen, where you can see here the chimney over there behind the tree, a stove where 5 oxes could be roasted at the same time on the skewer. It was necessary because about 500 persons should be nourished every day. The employees and members of court as well. They need to receive their food through windows as payment over there. A certain quantity of meat, vegetables and fruit and bread, wine, something. Therefore, they got all that stuff, but also to provide food for the festivals, for the invitations. Therefore, they got also kitchen for vegetables and soup for sides, slaughterhouse and the butcher stall where sausage was made. And as well, the bread has been baked in big loaves. The baking oven still exists, still inside. That is one of the biggest of Germany in this time, Europe, from the Middle Ages. The soldiers' building is right here, place for storage, and the wine cellar where we go down. Well, and the fountain hall is also very impressive because the columns have been recycled 2 times. Well, one basically was from the Romans, and then later, close to Mainz in the north, the rig has been taken out of a Carolingian palace and placed in the beginning of the 16th century. And actually, well, that part is now used here for the castle administration of the Heidelberg Castle on the federal state Baden-Württemberg, and therefore there's the flag over there on the tower, and the castle gastronomy, the restaurant. And there are 2 restaurants here for fine dining, Schloss Weinstube, and basically as well here for local specialties like tarte flambé and sausages. That's so-called Backhouse. And only one person lives in the castle. It's not a king, it's not an emperor, it's not a count. It is the castle cook, Martin Sharp, who is responsible here for food and beverage, and for great events with food and beverage, like the music of Queen in winter, with a live act of Freddie Mercury from November to January. Before was many well, I show you a poster then. So this year was Carmen and the Count, and the people sitting, watching it and drinking a glass of Aperol Spritz. Great dinner shows as well. The architecture of such buildings that you can see here, the who's who of the Counts of Palatinate, those who played important roles in the past. Well, the building has been built by Frederick IV, the guy here on the right-hand side with a sword and the imperial globe. Here at the beginning of the 17th century, 1601, 1607. But is a legitimation to govern as prince-electors, as viceroys, and wanted to present himself. The first is Charlemagne on the left-hand side up there. The renovator of the empire was symbolic princes. The last is Henry Frederick IV, who points his sword in the direction of Charles, the first one. But he continues the tradition. And Imperial Global Alliance, that is the guy who founded the University of Heidelberg. Look of heaven, that means that different sciences, and it's in 1386. Well, therefore, he is depicted right here with the books and with the globe of heaven. Next to is Frederick I, the lictors, well, governed in the second half of the 2nd century, large Palatinate, so its biggest size. Well, was a great conqueror. On the right-hand side is Frederick II. There from the 16th century, he was the first Protestant ruler. He was from the of Austria. Also Austria. And it was a king of Maximilian at that time. And Louis V made 2 decisions. Well, he sold a vote for the Habsburgian family and the king of Bohemia, Maximilian, and he prepared it for his grandson, Charles V, who became a later. And he inherited the super territory as well. Spain, his mother was Spanish, and the overseas colonies for Louis V, who had lots of money, he could realize his building project. Now the entrance tower, fortress buildings, now his palace over there. So you can say the buildings have been built against the indulgence letters. Luther has been controversial.
Tell us about the heads that are coming out. Like, what's that?
That are not certain people, well, that are basically prophecies and prophecies and common people. No, there are many people ask whether they're added in the late 19th century when it has been restored. We only believe the government was a prince-elector was a golden age for sciences, for music and arts, because he was a real enlightened personality. And he brought up a school of arts and sciences and he promoted it. And I'll show you a picture of him. He reminds you of somebody. Well, he reminds you of somebody for sure. That is Otto Henry. It's not Henry VIII. Otto Henry, well, who looks very, everybody changed him. That is the guy who introduced the new relief. He's got the typical clothing, very rich and stitchings with gold, yarn, and it's got the typical necklaces and chains and something like that. Well, and he was a real luxury lover. He collected tapestry and medals, when he was a young guy, and got a small territory now that has been guaranteed for him and his brother, and he lived wasteful and was bankrupt and needed financial help and people who paid his debts. Later, he has been financially controlled by his uncle Frederick II, that guy, who was his guardian. And he became old and governed until he died in 74. Now, Otto Henry was 20 years younger, and then his succeeding was not the youngest. He was at my age, as I'm now, 54 years old, and he was very sick and suffered from different diseases, from dropsy, from arthritis, from the fat of his chest as well. He couldn't go for a couple of meters without making a break. He got a breast raised of 2 meters and weighted about 220 kilos per height or 1 meter and 60. It didn't fit for every dog. Well, therefore, he needed a siege to be carried in, and 6 people who carried him got bottoms on their backs. He has been weighted on a cow's balance to get his weight and to make a siege, to produce a siege. In what tailor-made siege, what he has been transported in. By trying to go upstairs, such a winding staircase like there, he might have got stuck, and Beckwood was forced to make a diet for 2 days to fit through again. The uppermost part of the table, then you can see on the huge entrance that he could fit in, and then you can see on the planet gods in the uppermost part. Wonderful sculptural works by the Dutch sculptor Alexander Collin, with Jupiter and Sol, and then below Saturn, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and Diana, according to his interest in astronomy. Below are the virtues personified by women, strength, faith, charity, hope, and justice. And then below the heroes of the Old Testament, Joshua on the very left, David, Samson with a donkey's sharpening, where he defeated the army. And then on the very right is David with a Goliath, and Hercules with a club and a thought to lightning with a six-pack body, and with a portrait of Otto Henry. Well, it's a different body as Otto Henry. Well, 2 or 3 times more voluminous, and got a 1-pack body instead of a 6-pack body. He was popular because he was an organizer, and he took care as well for the people. Well, then later, with the turn to Protestant belief, it brought lots of problems as well. Conflicts with the Catholics, with the popes, with the bishops, and as well with the Habsburgians. It belonged to the Catholics, and the Counter-Reformation has been developed. At the end of the 16th century as well, a couple of wars in the Netherlands between the Protestants and the Catholic Dutch from the Habsburgian family. They didn't accept the Protestants, and that led to conflicts and battles as well. And Frederick IV, that guy, supported the Protestant Dutch. He was then the later prince-elector from a different familiar branch, and became the son-in-law of Orange and very devoted children. Then he founded the Protestant Union with England, with James I, who was just a Scottish king, and then the British king was one of the first Anglican Stuart. Well, and so agreed the idea to make an arrangement to make a wedding to strengthen the relationship with the Palatinate Prince-Elector Frederick IV by the wedding with the children. Elizabeth Stuart, James, with Frederick V. I'll show you the pictures of both. That is Frederick V. Isn't he beautiful? Yes, counted to the most beautiful nobles. Was only persuaded to one lady, didn't saw. His father arranged it. Elizabeth Stuart, and they were just 14 when he saw a portrait of her. He fell in love with that portrait, but the portraits are sometimes like Facebook, like Instagram. They married in Westminster. Well, had a big wedding party with show fighting and masquerade dance, and big banquet and big fireworks. It was beyond compare. Frederick and Elizabeth, and they got to know the British family until they went to Palatinate and governed as prince-electors. They were very young at that time, and so they traveled back as well to Palatinate with a big fleet counting 35 boats as well, and then to Cologne on the Rhine River, and along the Rhine and Neckar River on the big coach. Had been welcomed with fire and music and flowers. And in Heidelberg with fireworks, with artificial fire, pyromanic arts, and a wooden castle on the float. A big installation, but the provincial town, half-timber houses, not big. 6,000 inhabitants in London, 250,000 inhabitants. Stone houses. He became homesick and said to Frederick, "Darling, this is a village, not a town. They should be happy." But he has done everything to make her happy, build a palace and renew the shape, and I want to show you. Well, I spent the most lucky years here in Heidelberg. Well, because she was homesick, he arranged everything to make her happy with theater, 16-angle theater with a royal ensemble. I played The Storm by Shakespeare, and a wonderful garden, the so-called Palatinate garden called Hortus Palatinus, and here built upon 5 terraces, a kind of 8th world wonder, they called it, in remembrance of the hanging gardens of the pyramids in Baden-Württemberg. Sculptures and paintings, wonderful view, and beginning with water organs, driven by steam power from heating chambers, who played melodies of sculptures bathing in the lukewarm water with the sounds of the music out of the mouths of sculptures. Spent the most lucky years in Heidelberg and Perkeo. Have been offered to the king of Greek Bohemia when the last Bohemia. Let's make up your mind, and then they moved to Prague against the warnings of the Catholics, and have been defeated after a little bit more than 1 year at the Battle of the White Mountain, and nicknamed Winter Kings. They went out of the palace of Prague to exile to the destruction that siege began. 30 years began. Change of power, lots of population, ended up with the Peace of Westphalia. So one of the sons of Frederick and Elizabeth, Karl Louis, children, one of them was Sophia Frederick, the spouse of Prince August and mother of George. So the relationship. And then Karl Louis, one of the oldest sons, became prince-elector once again and made an alliance with France, with Louis XIV, the Sun King, and to have a strong partner and arrange a wedding with his daughter and the brother of Louis XIV, Philip of Orleans, and left the latter name so to the next big empire. And sometimes about 25, 26,000 gallons. An amazing big made out of books with the typical decorations, with the cornices. That was also for show off. Number 1, with a capacity of 21 feet high, 21 feet long, 27 feet long. It was made out of 90 oak from the best quality. On top of this, a platform with a family dance. Above is the hole where the wine has been poured into, and down there the tank. It has got a capacity, but would you guess how many liters will it? How many gallons? That is a real amazing. And how do they get that in the lineup? When there were lots of events out there with hundreds of persons, and later, a wonderful, very practical construction was made. A pipe.
We can come back to see it.
Yeah.
Out of the barrel. And so they raised that gate and covered it. And that has been uncovered when Elizabeth used it with she's in the world. But there's a bust of him that is called Deutsch. They got the name Deutsch. It means German. Material here is sandstone. There are a couple of quarries. But the whole Neckar Valley, they break the sandstone and use it here for the construction of houses and walls, particularly side walls as well. What a curve, 180 degrees, as you can see well. And 2 years ago, there was a landslide right here. The slope sank down, slided down. And it was so narrow. Rita has been cut off as well. And Stefan and his colleagues drove slow. There was centimeter works, a big challenge, especially for buses with 3 axes, as you can imagine. We pass high walls. As you can see, the basements were particularly used here for storage of wine. And this is here, behind that wall, the cemetery out of the city walls, and that here are the city walls from the Middle Ages and extramuros, and basically was the Jewish cemetery. The Christian, the church or the churchyard was
within the cities, well, but also directly edge and Jewish cemetery outside. And there are still about 152 monuments from the 18th and 19th century. It was well protected because there are a couple of sabotage and damages as well. Very ugly things, and therefore that is closed and only could be seen with special guided tours. Well, the Jewish population, the Jewish history dates back to the 13th century. The first Jewish society has been mentioned. Jewish life, very old, and until it became town, the Jews were part of a society and were basically very fit in making money and increasing money as well with giving credits. And they were not allowed to do any craft or to join a guild. Unfortunately, ugly things happened for the Jews as well. Even in the 14th century, the late 14th century, have been expelled, chased out of Heidelberg at first, and then later throughout the Holocaust. This was the most terrible things that happened. You should be conscious of, and holding generations conscious of that might wouldn't happen anymore, ever. Well, we got a new Jewish society the west as well here in the city, but the synagogue is in the west. There are about 500 Jews roundabout who came from eastern parts of Europe and from Russia. And we got the Jewish studies to learn about Jewish history, culture, art history as well, and the theoretical part for being rabbi. The street was formerly a railway track, and so we passed through this church of Heidelberg St. Peter, now in the Gothic style, basically built in Romanesque style. It has been first mentioned in the 12th century, with the first mentioning of Heidelberg, when it was just a village, not a town. It's not a church regular worship anymore, but it is basically for special for the Protestant community, and many exhibitions and concerts take place, or choirs. Very popular, the two monuments that reminds people have been buried there from the 15th to the 19th century. Teachers, professors, members of the family, and the 12 student, a Polish guy who studied, studying as the content of his life, and studied until he died at the age of 68, while he got very wealthy relatives who made it possible to sponsor his studies. Well, we drive through the tunnel called Castle Mountain Tunnel, and above us the ruins of the castle. Formerly it was a railway tunnel leading to the Mecca Valley. The new train station has been built in 1955. Well, because the older was too small, not fashioned enough as well. Increasing train traffic, well, there was overwhelmed. They built a new one. Removed the old one. There was pity as well. Lots of people were angry about that, and then the train track has been detoured, and this became a street. Surround the monument here, called Charles Gate, reminding of Prince-elector Karl Theodor, that I've already mentioned in context of the Mannheim Music School that inspired the Mannheim Steamrollers. It was in the era of Karl Theodor, a great modernizer and enlightened personality, who brought up acting of sciences, replaced by the Mannheim University, and he was very popular. And when he had to go to Munich to govern as well in Bavaria in 1778, lots of people were sad about that here. Therefore, they donated him such an arch of sandstone, a neoclassical style that hadn't got any other purpose than to be a monument. And the basement was particularly used as a prison. Paid long time the debts for the construction of that arch, as you could imagine. Karl Theodor, the Prince-elector, who was never inflicted in any war, he inherited everything that he got. So he could concentrate on the sciences and modernizations and institutions as well, and some crazy things like planting mulberry trees to breed the Silk War for silk production on alleys.